The morning sun barely touched the windows of the Riverside Community Center when Clara Rodriguez pushed through the heavy glass doors. She was early. Too early, really. But after working the night shift at 3 different office buildings, sleep wasn't coming anyway. Might as well get this over with. The building smelled like old coffee and floor polish. Clara knew that smell well. She'd been the one applying that polish to 100 different floors over the past 15 years. Her canvas bag hung from her shoulder, holding nothing but her wallet, a water bottle, and a crumpled piece of paper with the audition time written on it. She'd almost thrown that paper away a dozen times. At 42 years old, Clara felt ridiculous standing in line with teenagers and college kids, all of them clutching sheet music and chatting excitedly about their performances. A girl with purple hair was practicing vocal runs in the corner. 2 boys were arguing about guitar techniques. Everyone seemed to belong here except her. The young woman at the registration table looked about 25, wearing a bright yellow volunteer shirt and the kind of confident smile that comes from never doubting your place in the world. Her name tag read coordinator. She glanced up at Clara with barely concealed surprise. "Oh, hello. Are you here for the audition?" Clara nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Great. Name? Clara Rodriguez." The coordinator scanned her list, finger trailing down the page. "Ah, here you are. You put down piano, right?" "Yes." "Perfect. We're running a bit ahead of schedule, actually. The rehearsal room is down the hall, second door on your left. We just need to hear something basic, to make sure you can actually play." She laughed, as if this were obvious. "Most people just do Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Chopsticks. Keep it under 3 minutes, please. We have a lot of people to get through today." Clara's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Just something simple?" "Right. We're not looking for perfection, just basic competency. This is a community showcase, not a concert hall." The coordinator was already looking past her to the next person in line. "Down the hall, second door." "Good luck." Clara walked slowly down the corridor, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the linoleum. Through the walls, she could hear muffled music. Someone was singing. Someone else was playing what sounded like a drum. Her heart hammered in her chest with each step. The rehearsal room was smaller than she expected. Gray walls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a handful of folding chairs scattered around. But there, against the far wall, stood an upright piano. The wood was scratched, and the bench wobbled slightly when she sat down, but it was real. Actual keys, actual strings, actual hammers waiting to strike. Clara hadn't touched a real piano in 15 years. 2 volunteers sat in the corner, both absorbed in their phones. One was the coordinator from the front desk, who had apparently decided to observe this batch of auditions. The other was an older man with glasses, probably someone from the showcase committee. Neither looked particularly interested. "Whenever you're ready," the coordinator called out, not looking up from her phone. "Remember, just something simple. We need to move things along." Clara placed her bag carefully on the floor beside the bench. She flexed her fingers once, twice. They were calloused from years of scrubbing and mopping, the nails cut short and practical. Working hands, hands that hadn't played for an audience in 2 decades. The keys felt cool under her fingertips as she touched them for the first time. Middle C. The note rang out clear and true, despite the piano's age. She tested a few more notes, adjusting to the action, the weight, the voice of this particular instrument. "Twinkle, twinkle is fine," the coordinator said, a hint of impatience in her voice. "Or whatever you're comfortable with." In the corner, the older man sighed and shifted in his chair. He was probably thinking about lunch, about how many more mediocre performances he'd have to sit through before this day was done. Clara could see it in his posture, in the way he'd already started to tune out. They expected nothing from her. Why would they? She was just another name on a list. Another middle-aged woman who probably took a few piano lessons as a kid and thought she could recapture some small piece of that childhood magic. They saw her cleaning uniform polyester, her tired eyes, her cheap bag, and they'd already written the ending to this story. Clara closed her eyes. Her hands found their positions on the keys, muscle memory stronger than time itself. In her mind, she wasn't in a dusty rehearsal room in a community center. She was 22 years old, standing in the wings of the conservatory hall waiting for her name to be called. She could hear the applause, feel the heat of the stage lights, smell the roses that would be handed to her after the performance. She could hear her teacher's voice. Music is not about the notes, Clarita. It's about the truth you tell through them. Play with your whole heart, or don't play at all. Her fingers touched the keys, and instead of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, she began to play something else entirely. The opening notes rolled through the room like thunder, soft at first, then building. It wasn't a simple melody. It wasn't a children's song. It was Rachmaninoff, one of the most demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire, transformed and arranged for solo piano, an arrangement she had created herself, years ago, when the world still knew her name. Behind her, she heard the coordinator's phone hit the floor. But Clara didn't stop. Her hands moved across the keys with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. Fast passages that would make professional pianists sweat flowed from her fingers like water. Slow, emotional sections pulled at something deep in the chest, making it hard to breathe. The piano sang. It wasn't a cheap, out-of-tune upright anymore. Under Clara's hands, it became a symphony orchestra, a choir of angels, a voice crying out with joy and pain and everything human in between. In the hallway outside, footsteps stopped. Voices fell silent. Doors opened as people poked their heads out, trying to find the source of the music. The girl with purple hair stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth open. The two boys with guitars came running. Within a minute, the small rehearsal room was crowded with people, all of them pressed together, trying to see who was making this impossible sound. The coordinator stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face without her even realizing it. The older man had risen from his chair, his eyes wide with shock. Clara's whole body moved with the music now. Her shoulders swayed, her back arched, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Sweat formed on her brow. Her breathing came faster. This wasn't just playing. This was pouring 20 years of silence into 3.5 minutes of sound. This was every note she'd never played, every performance she'd never given, every dream she'd locked away coming out all at once. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating through the strings, through the walls, through every person in that room. Clara's hands remained on the keys, trembling. Her chest heaved. And for the first time in 15 years, she felt like herself again. The silence that followed was absolute. The coordinator was the first to find her voice. It came out barely above a whisper, "Who are you?" Clara's hands slowly lifted from the keys. She stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. The calluses, the rough skin, the small scar on her left thumb from a broken mop bucket last month. These were the hands of a cleaning woman. But for 3.5 minutes, they had been something more. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly, reaching down for her bag. "I know you said to keep it simple. I should have just played what you asked for." "No, wait!" The coordinator stepped forward, nearly tripping over a chair in her rush. Where did you learn to play like that?" The room was packed now. At least 20 people crowded around the doorway, with more pressing in from the hallway. Everyone was staring at Clara like she'd just pulled a rabbit out of thin air. Or like she was the rabbit, appearing where there should have been nothing. Clara stood up from the bench, clutching her bag to her chest the way she always did when she felt uncertain. "A long time ago. It doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter." The older man with glasses had found his voice too. He moved closer, studying Clara's face as if trying to solve a puzzle. That was Rachmaninoff's second concerto. The piano reduction, but not the standard one. That arrangement was different. More complex. "Where did you get it?" Clara's throat tightened. She hadn't expected anyone here to recognize the piece, let alone the specific arrangement. "I really should go. Thank you for letting me audition." "You're in," the coordinator blurted out. "Obviously, you're in the showcase. We'd be honored to have you perform. When can you come back? What other pieces do you know? Do you have a manager we should contact?" "A manager." The word almost made Clara laugh. She had a supervisor at the cleaning company who sent her the weekly building assignments via text message. That was as close to management as her life got these days. "I don't think I can be in the showcase," Clara said, edging toward the door. "I work nights. My schedule is difficult." We can work around your schedule, the coordinator insisted. Please. I've been organizing this showcase for 3 years and we've never had anyone like you. You're the real thing. The purple-haired girl spoke up from the doorway. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Like, I can't even describe it. I got chills. Others murmured in agreement. A few people had their phones out. Clara's stomach dropped when she noticed. Had they been recording? The thought made her feel dizzy. I need to go, she said more firmly this time. She pushed through the crowd as politely as she could, keeping her eyes down. Behind her, she could hear voices rising in confusion and excitement. Did anyone get her full name? Rodriguez, I think. Clara Rodriguez, Google her. See if anything comes up. That wasn't amateur level. That was professional. Like world-class professional. Clara walked faster, her sneakers squeaking frantically against the floor now. She hit the front doors and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, gasping as if she'd been underwater. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. What had she done? For 15 years, she'd kept that part of herself locked away, safe, hidden, playing on her cheap electric keyboard late at night with headphones on, where no one could hear, no one could judge, and no one could ask questions she didn't want to answer. She'd broken her own rule, and now there would be questions. Clara made it 3 blocks before she had to sit down on a bus stop bench. She put her head in her hands and tried to breathe normally. An elderly woman sitting nearby asked if she was okay. Clara nodded without looking up, not trusting her voice. The memories were flooding back now, uninvited and overwhelming. She hadn't let herself think about those days in so long. It hurt too much. But the piano had opened something inside her, and now it all came pouring out. She'd been 10 years old when her grandmother first noticed her talent. They'd been visiting a family friend who had an old piano in the living room, and while the adults talked, Clara had wandered over to it. She'd never had lessons, never even touched a piano before. But somehow her small fingers had found a melody, then harmony, then something that made all the adults stop talking and stare. Her grandmother, who cleaned houses for wealthy families in their neighborhood, had used her life savings to buy Clara a used keyboard and pay for lessons with a retired music teacher. Mr. Chen had taken one look at Clara's hands on the keys and told her grandmother she was looking at a gift that came along, once in a generation. By 14, Clara was performing in youth competitions. By 16, she'd won a full scholarship to the Riverside Conservatory of Music. By 19, she was being called a prodigy, a rising star, the future of classical piano. Her teacher, the legendary Dmitri Volkov, who'd moved to America from Russia decades earlier, had taken her under his wing. He'd told her she reminded him of the great pianists he'd known in Moscow, that she had something special, something rare. You don't just play the notes, Clarita, he'd say in his thick accent. You tell the story behind the notes. That's why people will remember you. And they had remembered her. For a little while, Clara lifted her head and stared at the traffic passing by. A taxi, a delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller. Normal life moving forward like it always did, indifferent to anyone's private pain. She'd been 23 when everything fell apart. Her grandmother had a stroke, massive and sudden. The hospital bills started coming immediately. Medicare covered some of it, but not all. Not the private care facility where her grandmother needed to stay. Not the specialist. Not the medications. Clara had been in her final year at the conservatory preparing for her graduate recital. She'd had auditions lined up with major symphonies. Managers were interested. Her career was about to begin. Instead, she'd dropped out, sold her good piano, taken the first job she could find that paid weekly instead of monthly, then a second job, then a third. Her grandmother had lived for 2 more years in that facility. 2 years of Clara working 70-hour weeks, sleeping 4 hours a night, showing up to play her grandmother's favorite songs on the facility's out-of-tune piano during her lunch breaks. 2 years of watching the strongest woman she'd ever known fade away, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but shallow breathing and distant eyes. When her grandmother died, Clara kept working. Because that's what you did. You survived. You paid the rent. You bought the groceries. You kept moving forward because stopping meant drowning. The piano became something from another life. Another person's dream. She couldn't afford to miss it because missing it meant feeling. And feeling meant breaking, and breaking meant not showing up to work. And not showing up to work meant losing everything. so she'd locked it away. All of it. The music, the memories, the person she used to be until today. Until some foolish part of her had seen that audition flyer at the community center and thought maybe just once she could touch those keys again. Just once she could remember what it felt like to be whole. Clara's phone buzzed in her bag. A text from Rita, her supervisor at the cleaning company. Don't forget tonight. The Jefferson building needs deep clean. Budget meeting tomorrow. Bring your supplies. Reality, pulling her back where she belonged. Clara stood up from the bench and started walking toward her apartment. She had 6 hours before her shift started. Time enough to sleep if sleep would come. Behind her, back at the community center, people were still talking about the woman who'd played like an angel and disappeared like a ghost. And somewhere in that crowd, someone's phone was uploading a video that would change everything. Clara didn't sleep. She lay on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, watching the afternoon light move across the water stains above her head. Her studio apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled argument happening somewhere down the hall. At 5:30, she got up and put on her work uniform. Navy blue pants, navy blue polo shirt with the company logo. She tied her hair back, filled her water bottle, and checked that she had everything in her bag. Cleaning supplies were in her car. She'd restocked the bathroom products at the Jefferson building from the supply closet there. Just another night. Just another shift. Except her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Clara arrived at the Jefferson building at 6:15. Same as always. The office workers were streaming out, heading home to their families and their dinners and their evening plans. A few nodded at her as she came in. Most didn't notice her at all. She was part of the background. The invisible workforce that made their world clean and functional. She started on the 3rd floor like she always did. Emptying trash cans, wiping down desks, vacuuming the carpets. The routine was soothing, familiar. Each task led to the next in a predictable pattern. No surprises. No audience. No questions. Around 8 o'clock, her phone started buzzing. Clara ignored it at first. Rita sometimes sent multiple messages about schedule changes or supply orders. But the buzzing didn't stop. One notification after another. Her phone was practically vibrating off the desk where she'd set it down. During her break, she finally looked. 43 missed calls. Over 100 text messages. Her social media accounts, which she barely used, were exploding with notifications. Friend requests from people she'd never heard of. Messages from strangers. Tags in posts she couldn't see yet. Her hands went cold. The first message was from her cousin Angela, sent 3 hours ago. "Clara! Is this you? Call me right now!" Then one from her old college roommate. "Oh my God, I'm crying. I always knew you were special." Then numbers she didn't recognize. "Is this the woman from the piano video? Are you available for events? Please contact me regarding representation. Piano video." Those 2 words made her stomach drop. With shaking fingers, Clara opened the video link that had been sent to her at least 20 times. There she was, sitting at that upright piano in the community center. The angle was from the side, shot on someone's phone, but the audio was surprisingly clear. She watched herself play, saw her own body sway with the music, saw the expression on her face that she'd never seen before because she'd never watched herself perform. She looked transformed. Like someone had reached inside her and turned on a light. The video had been posted 18 hours ago. It already had 2 million views. 2 million people had watched her play. 2 million strangers had seen the thing she'd kept hidden for 15 years. Clara's hands started shaking so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She scrolled through the comments, each one making her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. Who is this woman? She's incredible. That's not amateur playing. That's conservatory level, professional level. The way she transformed that piano. I'm literally sobbing. Someone find out who she is. She deserves to be on a real stage. Then she saw a comment that made her blood run cold. Wait, is this Clara Rodriguez? As in Clarita Rodriguez, who won the Belmont piano competition in 2005? She disappeared. I thought she quit music entirely. What happened to her? Someone had recognized her. Someone had connected this middle-aged cleaning woman to the young prodigy from 20 years ago. More comments piled on below it. OMG. You're right. I have her old competition program saved. It's definitely her. She was supposed to be the next big thing. Why is she auditioning at a community center? This makes me so sad. She should be performing at concert halls, not working night jobs. Clara felt like the walls were closing in. She sat down hard on the office chair behind her, her breath coming in short gasps. This was exactly what she'd feared. Why she'd stayed hidden, why she'd never told anyone about her past. Because once people knew, they had opinions. They had questions. They had expectations. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She didn't answer. It rang again immediately. Another unknown number, then a text from Angela. Clara, I don't know if you've seen the video, but it's everywhere. Please call me. I'm worried about you. Clara turned her phone off completely and shoved it in her bag. She stood up, grabbed her cleaning supplies, and went back to work. But her hands were shaking so badly she knocked over a bottle of glass cleaner. It spilled across the carpet, and she knelt down to blot it up with paper towels. Her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She worked until 2 in the morning, moving from floor to floor like a ghost. When she finally finished, she sat in her car in the parking garage for a long time, unable to make herself turn the key. When she got home, she made the mistake of turning her phone back on. Over 300 notifications now. The video was at 5 million views. It had been shared by classical music pages, talent scout accounts, and even a few celebrities. Someone had created a hashtag. Find Clara Rodriguez was trending. There was a voicemail from someone claiming to be from a morning talk show. Another from a concert promoter. One from a journalist who wanted to write her story, like it was something that belonged to other people now. Clara deleted the voicemails without listening to them fully. She started to delete the video link too, but something stopped her. Instead, she watched it again and again, trying to see what everyone else was seeing. She saw a woman playing piano, but she also saw something else. She saw someone finally telling the truth after years of lying by omission, lying about who she was and what she'd lost and what still lived inside her despite everything. The comments had shifted now. People were putting together the pieces of her story. Someone had found old newspaper articles about her early success. Someone else had discovered she'd left the conservatory without finishing. Theories flew about what had happened. Some were close to the truth. Most weren't. She probably got injured and couldn't play professionally anymore. Maybe she had a breakdown from the pressure. Could be family issues. The talented ones always have complicated lives. Nobody knew about her grandmother. About the medical bills. About the choice that wasn't really a choice. About the years of work that had turned her hands rough and her body tired. About the electric keyboard in the corner of her apartment that she played at midnight when the loneliness got too heavy. Around 4 in the morning, Clara saw a comment that made her stop scrolling. I don't care what her story is. I'm just grateful we get to hear her play again. That performance gave me chills. Music like that doesn't happen by accident. It comes from the soul. From the soul. Her teacher Dimitri used to say something similar. Technique is the vehicle, Clarita, but soul is the destination. Never forget which one matters more. Clara set her phone down and walked to the corner of her small apartment where her electric keyboard sat on a folding table. She'd bought it at a pawn shop 12 years ago with the money she'd saved from taking extra shifts during the holidays. It wasn't much. 61 keys, built-in speakers, headphone jack so she wouldn't bother the neighbors. She sat down and put on the headphones. Her fingers found the keys in the darkness, no light needed, and she played. Not Rachmaninoff this time. Something gentler. A Chopin nocturne that her grandmother had loved. Outside her window, the city was starting to wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Birds began their morning songs. In a few hours, the sun would rise, and she'd have to figure out what to do about all of this. But for now, in the quiet darkness of her apartment, Clara just played. Because whether 2 million people watched or no one watched at all, the music still needed to come out. It had always needed to come out. That was the truth she'd forgotten. The truth the piano had reminded her of yesterday. Some things you can lock away, but some things will find their way back to the surface no matter how deep you bury them. Her phone buzzed one more time on the table beside her. Clara glanced at the screen through the darkness. A message from an unknown number. Miss Rodriguez, my name is Helen Chen. I was your teacher, Dmitry Volkov's assistant for many years before he passed. I saw your video. He would have been so proud. Please call me when you can. We have much to discuss. Clara's fingers stilled on the keys. Dmitry was gone. She hadn't known. She'd lost touch with everyone from that world when she'd left. but his assistant was reaching out. After all these years? Because of one video, one performance that she'd almost been too afraid to give. Clara took off the headphones and picked up her phone. She stared at the message for a long time. Then finally she saved the number. Maybe tomorrow she'd call. Maybe tomorrow she'd start figuring out what came next. But tonight she just needed to sit with the fact that the world had seen her. Really seen her. And somehow, despite all her fears, she was still here. Still breathing. Still whole. The music hadn't destroyed her. Maybe it never would. Clara didn't call Helen Chen the next day. Or the day after that. She went to work. She cleaned the buildings. She ignored the hundreds of messages piling up on her phone. She told Rita, her supervisor, that she was having phone problems and to please just text her about schedule changes. Rita had shrugged and said fine as long as Clara showed up on time. The video kept spreading. By the end of the week, it had 15 million views. News outlets picked it up. Mystery pianist stuns internet with community center performance. Former prodigy emerges after 20-year absence. The cleaning woman who played like a virtuoso. Clara hated that last headline. Like those two things couldn't exist in the same person. Like working an honest job somehow made the music less real. Her cousin Angela showed up at her apartment on Saturday morning, pounding on the door until Clara finally answered. "You can't hide forever," Angela said, pushing past her into the tiny studio. She was carrying grocery bags and a determined expression. "When's the last time you ate something besides instant noodles?" "I'm fine, Angie. You're not fine. You're all over the internet. People are trying to find you and you're acting like nothing happened." Angela started unpacking the groceries, filling Clara's mostly empty fridge with actual food. "That Helen Chen woman?" I looked her up. "She works for the Metropolitan Arts Foundation now. Do you know how big that is? And you haven't even called her back." "I don't know what to say." Angela stopped and turned around, her expression softening. "How about the truth? How about telling her what happened?" "Why you left." Clara sat down on the edge of her bed. "Everyone's going to want to know the whole story. They're going to pick it apart. Judge my choices. Ask why I didn't find another way. Did you have another way?" The question hung in the air. Clara thought about her grandmother in that hospital bed. The bills that came every week. The way the doctors had explained that without proper care, she'd have maybe 6 months. With care, maybe years. What choice was that? "No," Clara said quietly. "I didn't." Angela sat beside her. "Then that's your answer. You did what you had to do. There's no shame in that. But I gave it up, Angie, the music, my career, everything I'd worked for since I was 10 years old. And for what? Grandma still died. All those years of working myself to exhaustion and she still died. She got 2 more years because of you. 2 years where she knew she was loved. Where she wasn't alone. That matters, Clara. That matters more than any concert stage." Clara felt the tears coming and couldn't stop them. Angela wrapped her arms around her and Clara cried the way she hadn't let herself cry in 15 years. For her grandmother. For her lost career. For the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become and the impossible weight of trying to be both. When the tears finally stopped, Angela pulled back and looked at her seriously. "You need to call Helen Chen, at least hear what she has to say. You don't have to commit to anything. Just listen." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Angela stayed until evening, making sure Clara ate, helping her clean the apartment, just being there in the way that family can be. When she finally left, she hugged Clara tight and whispered, "Grandma would be so proud of you. For surviving, for playing again, for everything." After Angela left, Clara sat on her bed with her phone in her hands for almost an hour. Finally, before she could change her mind, she dialed Helen Chen's number. The phone rang twice before a warm, professional voice answered. "Hello? Hi, this is Clara Rodriguez. You sent me a message about Dmitry Volkov. Clara, thank you so much for calling. I know this must be overwhelming. Can we talk for a few minutes?" Clara's throat was tight. "Okay. First, I want you to know I'm not calling to pressure you into anything. I just wanted to reach out because when I saw that video, I immediately recognized Dmitry's influence in your playing. The way you approached the phrasing, the emotional depth, it was like hearing him through your hands." "He was the best teacher I ever had," Clara said softly. "He spoke about you often, you know, even years after you left the conservatory. He said you were one of the most naturally gifted students he'd ever taught. He worried about you when you disappeared. The words hit Clara harder than she expected. He did? Yes, he tried to find you, actually. Called the number he had, but it was disconnected. Reached out to other faculty members, but no one knew where you'd gone. Eventually, he assumed you'd simply chosen a different path, but he never stopped wondering. Clara closed her eyes. She'd thought everyone from that world had forgotten her. That she'd been just another talented student who didn't make it. Knowing that Dmitri had looked for her, had thought about her, made something in her chest ache. "I'm sorry I disappeared like that," Clara said. "I had family circumstances. My grandmother was sick. I needed to work." "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Helen said gently. "But I want you to know that what you did in that video, that wasn't just muscle memory or technical skill. That was artistry, real profound artistry, the kind that doesn't fade just because life gets hard. I haven't performed in 20 years. I work as a cleaning woman. I play on a cheap keyboard in my apartment at midnight. I'm not that person anymore, and aren't you? Because that video suggests otherwise." Clara didn't know how to respond to that. Helen continued, her voice careful but hopeful. "The Metropolitan Arts Foundation has a program for artists who've had to step away from their careers due to life circumstances. We help them transition back if that's what they want. No obligations, no pressure, just support and resources. Would you be interested in hearing more about it?" "I don't know if I can go back to that world," Clara admitted. "It's been so long, and I have bills to pay, a job, responsibilities. The program includes a stipend, enough to live on while you're training and preparing. We'd also help you navigate returning to performance if that's a direction you want to explore. But Clara, I want to be clear. This isn't charity. We do this because we believe in preserving artistic talent, and because Dmitri would have wanted someone to help you if they could." Clara felt her resolve wavering. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm sending you an email with more information about the program. Read through it when you're ready. And Clara, whatever you decide, I hope you keep playing. The world needs to hear what you have to say through music." After they hung up, Clara sat in silence for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, the one she mostly used for checking her work schedule, and found Helen's email waiting for her. The program details were there, just as promised. A 12-month fellowship, a stipend that was almost double what she made cleaning, access to practice spaces and instruments, mentorship from working professionals, help with performance opportunities if she wanted them. It seemed impossible. Like something that happened to other people. Lucky people who hadn't spent 15 years scrubbing toilets and mopping floors, but then again, playing piano at a community center and having 2 million people watch had seemed impossible too. Clara looked at her electric keyboard in the corner. Then at her work uniform hanging on the back of her door, 2 different versions of herself existing in the same small apartment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rita. "Need you to cover the Thompson building tomorrow night. Double shift. Extra pay." Extra pay meant she could fix the check engine light that had been on in her car for 3 months. Extra pay meant security, safety, the known quantity of her current life. Clara stared at the message, then at Helen's email, then at the keyboard again. Tomorrow she'd have to decide. Tomorrow she'd have to choose between the life she'd built from necessity and the life she'd dreamed of before necessity took over. But tonight, she sat down at the keyboard, put on her headphones and played. She played the piece she'd performed at the community center. Then she played her grandmother's favorite Chopin. Then she played something new, something that came from that space between grief and hope, between giving up and trying again. Her neighbors couldn't hear her through the headphones. The world couldn't see her in her small apartment. But she could hear herself. She could feel the music moving through her fingers, through her body, through her heart. And for the first time in 20 years, Clara let herself imagine what it might be like to say yes. To step back into the light, to become once again the person she'd been before the world had asked her to choose between survival and dreams. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to choose anymore. Maybe she could be both. The woman who'd survived impossible circumstances and the artist who'd never really died, just waited in the quiet darkness for her moment to return. The music played on, and Clara played with it, and somewhere in that small apartment, something that had been broken for a very long time began finally to heal. Clara gave her 2 weeks' notice on Monday morning. Rita stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You're quitting? After 15 years? Where are you going?" Did someone offer you more money? I'm going back to school, Clara said simply. For music, Rita blinked. Music? You mean like teaching music to kids or something? Something like that. Clara didn't elaborate. She couldn't explain the full story while standing in Rita's cluttered office with the scheduling charts on the wall and the smell of industrial cleaner hanging in the air. She just filled out the paperwork, shook Rita's hand, and walked out feeling lighter than she had in years. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Clara worked her final shifts, said goodbye to the buildings she'd cleaned for over a decade, and started preparing for the fellowship. Helen Chen had connected her with Dr. Patricia Wong, a renowned pianist who'd be her primary mentor in the program. Their first meeting was at the Foundation's practice facility, a beautiful building in the Arts District that Clara had walked past 100 times but never entered. Inside, it smelled like wood polish and possibility. Practice rooms lined both sides of a long hallway, and through the doors she could hear scales, arpeggios, and fragments of concertos being rehearsed. Dr. Wong was a small woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was waiting in one of the larger studios, sitting at a full-sized grand piano that gleamed under the soft lights. Clara, she said warmly, standing to shake her hand. I've watched your video about 50 times. Sit, please. Let's talk. Clara sat in one of the chairs along the wall, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. How are you feeling about all of this? Dr. Wong asked. Terrified, Clara admitted. I haven't had formal training in 20 years. My hands aren't what they used to be. I'm 42 years old. Most professional pianists my age have been performing consistently their entire adult lives. Dr. Wong nodded thoughtfully. All of that is true, but you know what else is true? You played Rachmaninoff after 20 years away from a real piano, and you made people cry. Technique can be rebuilt, strength can be restored, but that thing you have, that ability to communicate pure emotion through music, that's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't. And Clara, you have it in abundance. Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. I'm just afraid I'm too late. That I missed my chance. Late for what? For some predetermined timeline that says you should have made it by 30? That's nonsense. Dr. Wong leaned forward. Some of the greatest pianists didn't hit their stride until their 40s or 50s. They had lives. They had experiences. They had something to say through their music because they'd actually lived. You've lived, Clara. That's not a disadvantage. That's your strength. Over the next 3 months, Clara threw herself into the program with the same determination she'd once applied to her cleaning work. She practiced 6 hours a day, rebuilding the calluses on her fingertips, strengthening her hands, relearning pieces she'd once known by heart. Dr. Wong was a patient but demanding teacher. She didn't let Clara hide behind technique. She pushed her to dig deeper, to connect every note to an emotion, a memory, a truth. Why are you playing this phrase so carefully? Dr. Wong would ask. What are you afraid of? And Clara would have to answer honestly. I'm afraid of making mistakes, of not being good enough. Good enough for whom? For the critics who don't know your story? For the audience who's already fallen in love with your playing? Or for that scared part of yourself that's been hiding for 20 years? Those conversations were harder than any technical exercise. But slowly, Clara began to open up. She played pieces that reminded her of her grandmother. She played the music that had sustained her through the loneliest nights. She played with the full weight of her experience, her grief, her survival, her hope. The fellowship culminated in a recital. Nothing huge or intimidating, just a small performance in the Foundation's concert hall for donors, other fellows, and invited guests. Clara could invite whoever she wanted. She invited Angela, her old roommate from college, a few co-workers from the cleaning company who'd been kind to her over the years, and nervously, she invited the coordinator from the community center where this had all started. The day of the recital, Clara stood backstage in a simple black dress that Angela had helped her pick out. Her hands were shaking. Through the curtain, she could hear people finding their seats, the murmur of conversation, the rustling of programs. Dr. Wong appeared beside her. How are you doing? I feel like I'm going to throw up. Dr. Wong laughed. Good, that means you care. The day you stop feeling nervous is the day you stop growing as an artist. She squeezed Clara's shoulder. Remember, you're not playing for them. You're playing for you, for your grandmother, for that 10-year-old girl who first touched a piano and knew she'd found her voice. Everyone else just gets to listen. The lights dimmed in the hall. It was time. Clara walked onto the stage and the audience applauded politely. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the faces watching her. Angela was in the third row, grinning with tears already streaming down her face. The community center coordinator was there too, looking proud. Clara placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. She thought about her grandmother, sitting in family friend's living room watching a 10-year-old girl discover magic. She thought about Mr. Chen, her first teacher who'd seen potential in a kid from a poor neighborhood. She thought about Dmitry Volkov, who'd believed in her enough to take her as a student. She thought about 15 years of night shifts and empty buildings and music played in silence where no one could hear. And then she played. She started with the Chopin nocturne her grandmother had loved. Soft and gentle like a lullaby. Then she moved into a Beethoven sonata that spoke of struggle and triumph. Then Rachmaninoff, of course. The same piece from the video, but different now. Richer, deeper, because she wasn't running from her past anymore. She was embracing it. The final piece was something she'd composed herself during the fellowship. A short work that Dr. Wang had encouraged her to develop. It was called Night Shift, and it captured everything she'd felt during those years of cleaning buildings alone. The loneliness, yes, but also the quiet dignity of work, the meditation of repetitive tasks, the way music had lived inside her even when she couldn't let it out. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous in the small hall. Angela was openly sobbing. Even Dr. Wang, standing in the wings, had tears in her eyes. Clara stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the sound of people celebrating not just her music but her return. Her survival. Her refusal to let the hard years kill the thing that made her who she was. After the recital, people crowded around her. They wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how her music had moved them, to ask when she'd perform again. The community center coordinator hugged her and said, "I knew there was something special about you. I'm so glad you didn't just play Twinkle, Twinkle." Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Helen Chen appeared with a glass of champagne and a knowing smile. So what's next? Clara had been thinking about that question for weeks. The fellowship was ending. She had decisions to make about her future. Did she want to pursue a performance career? Teaching? Something else entirely? "I got an offer," Clara said. "A small concert series wants me to perform next season, and there's a community music program that needs teachers for students who can't afford private lessons. Kids like I was, and I think I want to do both. Perform sometimes, teach. Maybe keep 1 or 2 cleaning shifts just to stay grounded." She smiled. "I spent 20 years being only one thing. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be all of it. The performer, the teacher, the woman who knows what it's like to work hard for survival. All of it matters. All of it made me who I am." Helen raised her glass. "To all of it, then." They toasted, and Clara looked around the room at the people celebrating with her. This wasn't the career she'd imagined at 22. It was smaller in some ways, more modest, but it was hers. Built on her terms, shaped by her choices, infused with the wisdom that only comes from losing everything and finding your way back. 3 months later, Clara stood on a real concert stage for the first time in 20 years. It was a small venue, only 300 seats, but everyone was filled. The program listed her as Clarita Rodriguez Piano, the name she'd been born with, the name her grandmother had called her. As she played that night, Clara thought about the winding path that had brought her here. The grief and the survival and the moment of courage in a community center, when she decided to play her truth instead of playing it safe. She thought about how easy it would have been to stay hidden, to let fear win, to decide that some doors once closed can never be opened again. But she'd opened it. She'd walked through, and on the other side wasn't the life she'd lost, but something new, something that belonged entirely to her. The music poured out of her fingers, and the audience listened. And somewhere in the space between the notes and the silence, Clara finally understood what Dmitry had tried to teach her all those years ago. The music was never about being perfect. It was about being true, and after everything, after all the year,